Told y'all I already had the script ready for this. See, books and movies often talk about the exploits of successful robbers. You know, the ones that lived the high life. You know, they had the fame, fortune, and in some cases even got away with it. But they often don't talk about the robbers that weren't successful. You know, the ones that were known more for their blunders rather than their successful ventures. And today, we are talking about probably the biggest robbery blunder in U.S. history. The Coffeeville Massacre.
Can't sleep, gotta clear my mind, that's fine, on time. I'll be chilling on the weekends with my friends. I'll be rhyming while I'm fucking driving, and it'll be,
Now, I think to fully understand the story and really understand the kind of people that were in this robbery, you should watch my first video talking about Bill Doolin and the Oklahombres as a whole. But I'll give you kind of the cliff notes. So, the Oklahombres were a group of outlaws that originally started as cowboys and lawmen even. But as the economy had taken a shit, a lot of them were out of work, and a lot of them were just simply tired of living the blue-collar lifestyle. So they started out small. You know, they started with introducing alcohol to the natives, which was illegal at the time in Oklahoma. Then they got into bigger stuff like robbing stagecoaches. And then finally they just went into full-on, you know, like bank and train robbery. And that was kind of like the main thing they were known for. And it's what got them national attention. You know, they were big names. So the gang had two separate co-leaders, Bill Doolin and Bob Dalton. Now, whenever Bob Dalton wasn't pushing up daisies, that's whenever the gang was primarily known as the Dalton Gang, until he pushed up daisies, and then it became the Doolin Gang thereafter. You know, but that's after. On October 5th, 1892, the Daltons attempted to rob two banks at the same time, the First National and the Condon Bank in the town of Coffeyville. Now, these guys had done well at first, you know, sticking up stagecoaches and trains and the like, but they had never robbed a bank before. Well, on October 5th, 1892... Bob Dalton had the grand idea to rob two banks in his hometown at the same time in broad daylight. Whenever he told Bill Doolin this story, Bill Doolin said, and I don't quote, but I assume, "No, I like living." And so he decided not to. So his group of the gang, you know, Oliver Yantis, Charlie Pierce, Tulsa Jack Blake, and Bill himself, most likely didn't participate in the robbery. I'll get to that later. Emmett and Bob Dalton went for the First National, while their brother Grat, disguised with a mustache and whiskers, went with Dick Broadwell and Bill Powers to stick up the Condon. Every time I see that word, I keep wanting to say condom. Like, it's really hard for me not to say that. Unfortunately and unsurprisingly, a bystander recognized the gang members, being that almost all of them were from there. The other aspect being that they were all very wanted men. You know, they had reputations at that point, especially in their hometown. So given everybody and their grandma knew what these guys looked like, had known that they were wanted for sticking up banks, and then just suddenly strolled into town heading to a couple of their banks, which, I mean, yeah, of course they'd be suspicious. I mean, they knew exactly what they looked like. They grew up with them. The witnesses to the robbers quickly and quietly spread the word to the rest of the townsfolk that the Daltons were in town and looking to make some withdrawals on their banks, arming themselves with guns from the local hardware stores. A mustache and goatee disguised Emmett Dalton pointed his Winchester lever-action rifle right at the teller, demanding he give all the money. Funnily enough, he had actually already known the teller's name. We know this because he addressed him by his name while robbing him. That just shows, like, how dumb the robbery was. He personally knew the guy he was robbing, but he still committed the crime thinking he'd get away with it. The bank teller made sure to give Emmett small bits of gold and cash at a time in order to stall the robbers until the townsfolk showed up. So while the gang was conducting the robbery and filling their grain sacks with hard-robbed cash, the townsfolk had gathered their arms and quickly surrounded both banks. So, after the Daltons walked out of the banks and collected their money, they quickly locked eyes with many pissed-off townsfolk. They opened fire immediately, forcing the Daltons to go back into the bank. So in a short decision to not be completely moronic, Bob and Emmett decided to make a break for it out the back door. While they were leaving, Lucius M. Baldwin walked out of Esham's hardware store. Bob Dalton, seeing him, drew his Winchester on Baldwin and shot him dead in the back alley. In order to keep the townspeople from giving chase while fleeing the bank, Bob Dalton then turned around and fired a shot at the First National Bank, fatally killing a former friend of Bob's, George Cubine. See, I wasn't able to find if he was purposely aiming at Cubine or if he was just trying to surprise fire. But given that Cubine was Bob's friend and Bob wasn't, like, particularly bloodthirsty, I think it was just a bad case of wrong place, wrong time kind of thing, you know? Reaching the middle of the street, he fired another shot, killing a man named Charles Brown. Man, this guy's either, like, a really good shot, or he's really lucky, or both. Like, he killed 3 people while being chased by a bunch of angry townsfolk while they were all shooting at him. And I think this was his first gunfight. That's pretty damn impressive. Then continuing down the street, Bob shot toward the bank again, and this time his victim was Thomas Ayers, the teller for the First National Bank. Luckily, Thomas's wound wasn't fatal. Emmett Dalton then ran ahead of Bob with $21,000 in a sack, which adjusted for inflation would be almost $735,000 in today's money. If they could get away with it, that is. Meanwhile, in the condom bank, a clever and pretty brave cashier named C.M. Ball managed to trick the robbers with the classic claim, "The vault's on a time lock, no one can get inside" joke. No idea why I said joke there, that wasn't funny. C.M. saying, and I quote, "The time lock is set for 9:45. In reality, the time lock was set for 8 o'clock, but Ball didn't feel the need to tell the robbers that. One of the robbers stated, and I quote, "That is only 3 minutes yet, and I will wait." Now, mind you, in a robbery of that scale and utter fucking ridiculousness, honestly, 3 minutes is a long time, and a lot can happen in 3 minutes. The 3 minutes gave the townsfolk plenty of time to surround the condom bank, armed to the teeth and pissed off. Suddenly, one of the townsfolk managed to take a look in the bank window and take a nice shot on Bill Broadwell, shooting him in the arm. Quickly picking up the $1,500 in loose cash, the three Jesse James wannabes incredibly stupidly just bolted out the front door and fled to the back alley, where they met up with Bob and Emmett Dalton. Now, if this was like a kick-ass Western movie, it would end with all the robbers making a bold escape in a bloody gunfire shootout, you know, and running away with the $800,000 in cash and fleeing to Mexico. But this isn't a movie. This is real life. In order for the outlaws to leave, they would have to run 300 feet through the rest of the town while their backs were towards a dozen men hid behind wagons and armed to the teeth with lever-action rifles and shotguns. Not to mention all the people inside the stores and on the second floors of the buildings that would be shooting at the gang as they ran by. As you can imagine, the fire was constant and rapid for 3 minutes. Until someone in the crowd yelled, "They are all down!" The townsfolk got closer to the downed robbers, then demanding for them to get their hands up. Of the 4 outlaws laying on the ground, only Emmett could raise his hands up. He was the only survivor. Allegedly. Between the bodies of the outlaws laid Marshall T. Connolly, a very brave townsperson who, from what I gathered, tried to either physically stop the robbers during the gunfight, or was just really close to them and shot at them whenever they were close. As for who shot Connolly, I couldn't find an answer, but it had to have been either the outlaws that did it, or maybe an accidental shooting from the townsfolk, or both. Surprisingly, the outlaw John Moore managed to escape the ordeal, though wounded. So the town quickly gathered a posse to go after him, and a half a mile outside the town they found the body of John Moore, who had died from his injuries. See, funnily enough, they took the bodies of the dead bandits and put them in the local jail as kind of a, yeah, you didn't escape justice kind of things. 1800s shit. So in the end, when the dust had settled, it had been found that around 15 guns were fired in the Coffeyville debacle. 5 guns belonging to the Doolin gang, and 10 belonging to the townspeople. It should also be mentioned that unlike what some journalists had to say at the time, the townspeople had no idea that the Doolins would be attempting to rob at least one of their banks around that time. Had they had known that, there'd be police on standby and probably Pinkertons disguising themselves as bankers in the banks. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, they knew that the Daltons were going to show up eventually, because, you know, they had family there, they lived there, you know, they were from there. But they had no idea that something like that was going to happen, or they'd have prepared for it. I think they didn't expect that because they figured that if they were able to rob all the other stuff they did so successfully, they wouldn't do something so stupid. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, at that point, you might as well rob a fucking gun store, you know? It should also be mentioned that there may have also been an alleged mystery man who got away in the robbery. A guy who was allegedly waiting by the horses in the alley. It's speculated that it very well could have been Bill Doolin. But while I could see the mystery guy with the horses as likely, but given that Doolin thought that Bob's idea was completely fucking batshit, I don't think he would have tagged along. Now, it is claimed that he may have ridden with them to the robbery, but then pretended his horse threw, which is like the modern-day flat tire. So he allegedly headed to a nearby ranch to replace it. Now, that seems more likely, but even then, that doesn't really fit, like, Bill Doolin's character. I've also seen where it said whenever he saw their disguises that he laughed at them and he thought it was fucking funny. You know, where they had, like, the spy mustache and shit. Now, at this point, I find it interesting to talk about the only guy that we know for a fact actually made it out of the robbery and what his life was after that, you know, Emmett Dalton. He had survived 23 gunshot wounds, surprisingly, which, in 1892, removing 23 gunshot wounds, Jesus Christ. He was given a life sentence in the Kansas Penitentiary at Lansing and was finally pardoned after 14 years. In 1907, the governor of Kansas was convinced he changed his ways after finding religion. See, this is already sounding like a Michael Francis story, like in the 1800s, or 1907. And with that being said, just like, Michael Francis, Larry Lawton, and that bunch on YouTube, he really did manage to turn his life around. He gave it up, and he actually did what they did and capitalized on it by writing books, acting, doing public speaking about it, warning people the dangers of getting into that life, so that's not like a new concept. That was stuff that was going on even back then, and I had no idea about that. He moved to California and became a real estate agent, author, and actor, marrying Julia Johnson in 1908. It should also be mentioned that Emmett had to live a different life even after being a criminal or in prison, this being that he was now famous for riding with the likes of Bill Doolin and the Oklahombres. He experienced things like people always gathering around him every time he went out to eat, or to the bar constantly having to talk to people interested in his story. And that means that he had to deal with that even when he didn't fucking want to, which it sounds like he didn't want to about 90% of the time.
Could you do that ogre roar of yours for my son? He's a big fan.
Do the roar.
It's also stated that he's well aware as to why it was like that. He knew it wasn't for his looks or anything. He knew everyone wanted to talk to him about him being a man killer and a former criminal.
Do the roar.
Emmett referred to himself as a relic of the dangerously bright days, and he'd often attend public speaking events saying things like, and I quote, "The sea of time is strewn with wrecks, and most of these wrecks are caused by men and boys not following the true chart in the voyage of life." I gotta admit, that's pretty fucking deep, dude. But given the kind of life he had led, and that he basically made a career about having to talk about the things he saw and did, Emmett was still a pretty troubled guy, often getting shit-faced drunk in a new town he was speaking at, and ended up in the town jail for fighting with the police officers trying to help him stumble back to his hotel room, fighting in general, or just public drunkenness. There even being one point where he walked into a busy Tulsa road while he was pissed drunk and got hit by a fucking car. As a fellow Okie, that's pretty par for the fucking course. See, something else as well about the Daltons that I had no clue about whenever I first came out with the Bill Doolin and Oklahombres video. The Daltons were related to the Youngers, like the James Younger gang Youngers. And given that both Cole Younger and Emmett loved to tell their tales, Cole also ended up getting into a drunk escapade with Emmett the Booze Hound. At one point in the spring of 1912, after being arrested for public drunkenness and being escorted by the police to the St. Louis, Missouri train station's police headquarters, where then the sergeant asked the drunk off his ass Emmett what his name and occupation was, and he said, and I quote, "Emmett Dalton, sir, of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. I am here to publicly speak to the people about my escapades as an outlaw and how to rob banks." Like, as he's stumbling into the jail, "I'm here to teach people how to rob banks." And he was in, cowboy attire, to perform. Cole, also being a bit drunk himself, left Emmett sleeping on the jail bench, still in his cowboy clothes. Now, this next story I'm about to mention is really fucking cool. The son of James C. Brown, the shoemaker who Emmett killed in Coffeyville because he tried to pick up his Winchester to stay in the battle, had actually held a very understandable grudge against Emmett, vowing to kill him one day in retribution.
"You killed my father. Prepare to die."
Brown's son had held this grudge for 13 years until finally deciding to forgive Emmett, and even bailing him out of the Joplin County Jail, of which he was staying for 30 days for repeated drunken offenses. According to jailhouse witnesses, Emmett quietly cried in the jail after finding out about Brown's son's gesture. Though Emmett did claim it wasn't him that killed his dad, it was Bob. Which I do think is the case. I don't think it was Emmett who killed him. James just assumed. Or James just simply wasn't sure. "Hi, Houston. Are you good friending today? Are you good friending tonight?" "Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You're good friending, baby. You finish my video, and I'm going to hold you. And I'm going to feed you chips." In May 1918, he wrote a serialized story appearing in a London monthly magazine called Beyond the Law, in which he documents himself and his old criminal gang's exploits. Also in 1918, the same story was turned into a silent film directed by Theodore Marston, where Emmett actually starred in the role, playing as himself. His 1931 book, titled When the Daltons Rode, which was co-wrote by Jack Hamer Sr., the book clearly being about, you guessed it, trains, was also adapted into a 1940 film of the same name, Emmett himself being played by Frank Albertson of It's a Wonderful Life and Psycho fame. Dying at the age of 66, Dalton passed away on July 13, 1937, His remains being buried in the Kingfisher Cemetery. And there you have it, guys. I felt the need to separate the Bill Doolin and the Oklahombre's video from this because I felt like it would make it too long, and given the incredibly well-received James Randi video, which was like about half the length of the Bill Doolin one, that was a good thing. Oh, by the way, thank you guys for watching that James Randi video. I had no idea it was going to get that many views. I was figuring it would get like 150 to 300, you know, maybe 500. Last time I looked, it's got 1,600. You know, thank you so much, guys. Thank you. I decided for my next video, I want to see you guys in the comments vote on it. So, what I thought was this. Right now, I have the script about half done for whenever the mob won the lottery, which is about Whitey Bulger scamming, you know, trying to do the money laundering shit. Or, I also am currently writing the script on Diogenes of Sinope, aka the crazy philosopher who pissed on people in public. Also, I've been thinking about maybe my next doc being about Steve Irwin. So, with this being said, I'm going to let you guys choose. Which do you want? Do you want to see the Diogenes video first, the Whitey Bulger video first, or the Steve Irwin video first? With that being said, if you choose the Diogenes or Steve Irwin one, it will take longer for the video to come out because I'm not anywhere near done with those scripts. The Steve Irwin one I haven't even started. But if that's what you guys really want to see, I'll make it for you guys. You know, I'll show that one to you guys first. I want to please my fans. But yeah, guys, thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that, you know. And please check out my music on SoundCloud, Spotify, my band Password Society. We're hopefully going to come out with music soon this year. I'm going to be doing some stand-up soon as well. You know, it's been a great time. I'm so happy with how my channel is, and you guys have been such great fans. You've been so nice, you know, and I'm really building something cool with y'all. But yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Catch you later.
11 toes down.